Hello and welcome to the Reread or Not Reread book tag. This tag was created by Robert G. Reader of Books. I was tagged by Allen at Big Hard Books and Classics, Ven from Ven's Corner, and Stuart at Stuart Griffin. And if you're wondering why I'm chuckling a bit, I just realized that with the angle of the camera and the length of my hair, some people, especially from the thumbnail, may be wondering what kind of video this is. And yes, I do in fact have a top on. It isn't one of those kinds of videos. So now that we have that cleared up, prompt number 1. Do you reread fiction? Why or why not? The answer is, I do now. I didn't often reread fiction before BookTube, typically because once I finished a book, I already knew how it ended, and so I didn't go back and often revisit them. There are some that I have, but they were few and far between. Now I've reread a number of them, partly to make content for BookTube, and so I knew the characters and the story, and partly because they're just a fun revisit. So some examples would be Obsidian Murders, which I just did readings of and a review. So I've read that twice, and it was enjoyable beginning to end. I've reread Michael McDowell's works. I'd read him originally decades ago, recently found his works published again. So I've reread The Amulet and Cold Moon Over Babylon, and they were as great a read this time as they were originally. So there's a number of authors I've enjoyed revisiting in the fiction genre, partly because it's been so long since I've read the stories. Do you reread nonfiction? Why or why not? As I've already shared recently, and this video may be up before the other one, but all of these cubes, there are 16 of them, are filled with nonfiction books. The bookcase behind me, known as Mallory, because that's the student who made this bookcase at a vocational school where I was working. But all of these books are also nonfiction, as well as four cubes sitting next to me. In other words, I have a lot of nonfiction books. It's actually well over 50%, probably closer to 70% of my personal collection, and I reread them quite a bit. I have self-help books here, and so I'll revisit them, particularly Magic of Believing by Claude M. Bristol, and a few of the other authors. Down on this bottom shelf, I have all my books on Reiki, other energy healing, crystals, chakras. So again, I'll go back and either refer to them or reread them front to back because there's always something new to be gained. So yeah, I've revisited my nonfiction books quite a few times, and I'll certainly be doing that this year with the Da Vinci Spiral and the Bible Study Project and the Pagan Project. Number 3, if you reread fiction, what kind of fiction are you most likely to choose? And the choices given are bestsellers, classic literature, genre fiction, so fantasy, science fiction, mysteries, romance, westerns, adventure stories. And what is your reason for the choices you've made? I typically don't read bestsellers when they come out. One exception recently was Fourth Wing, but that was an exception, and I won't be rereading that. Classical literature, absolutely. I've read Dracula at least 4 times. I've read Carmilla twice. I am planning to revisit Frankenstein, as well as Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. Just read those for the first time a couple of years ago, but I certainly knew them from the movies, and a number of other classics. H.G. Wells, I've now read his works twice. I picked up a box set a few years ago. So the classics I definitely enjoy going back to, partly because they're nice and short. They're great stories. They're maybe a day, 2 days at the most reads. So it's a nice revisit and, escape. As far as the genre fiction, I do read fantasy and science fiction. I'm rereading both of those currently, as in The Wheel of Time. As a group read, I'll be revisiting, comically enough, the entire ACOTAR series. That will be a group read, so a different experience than me reading it on my own, and that's part of why I'm reading it again. Mysteries, I tend not to. I guess the exception, because although it's urban fantasy, there certainly is mystery aspects to the Midnight Detective Agency. But if it's something like, say, a Kathy Reichs that I read for the first time last year, I'm not likely to read that a second time, just because it's one of those, I know how it ends. And I know that sounds funny because there are movies I've watched over and over and over again, and I know how they end. It's just somehow different. Romance. Well, ACOTAR is the closest that I get, and rereading that's an exception. I've never read a Western and adventure stories. I may have some, but I can't think of any offhand. So the reasons I've kind of explained, it's either I'm doing them as a buddy read, or I found someone to chat with about the book, so I'm reading it again. And I think that covers number 3. Number 4, if you reread nonfiction, what kind of nonfiction are you most likely to choose? And the choices here are histories, biographies, autobiographies, memoirs, philosophy, science, theology, travelogues. What's your reason for the choices? So I'll go through the choices first. Histories, the closest that I have, I guess, in that genre would be ancient civilizations. So the Mayans, ancient Egyptians, the Aztecs, things about Scotland and other areas of the world. And yes, I do reread those, partly because of the Da Vinci Spiral, partly because I enjoy the reads. And again, there's always something more to pick up as you go through them. And I think for me, part of the reread is because I spent 23 years of my working career in schools, and a lot of that time was working with resistant or struggling readers and assigned to a lot of English classes. So, of course, we would encourage students to read something more than once, whether it was an article to glean the information and put together the assignment, or whether it was reading a chapter or chapters as we were doing novel studies. So that reading something more than once is just ingrained in how I do things. And I'm not someone who just reads a book and goes to the next title. I read it, I think about other books it relates to, other subjects I've read about, time periods, everything. So it's pulling things together. And in order to do that effectively, I need to go through the books more than once. Yes, I do annotate like crazy and use tags and write in the margins and highlight. And I also do handwritten notes as well. Yes, I'm that nerd. Biographies, I don't tend to read very often, same as autobiographies. They're an exception. I've read a few. I read one by Kevin Sorbo years ago. Have no interest in reading that again. There was one by Michael J. Fox that I enjoyed reading, but other than that, there's none really twigging my memory, which tells you how few I read. Memoirs, again, I have a few that I need to read, but nothing standing out as I've read it and need to revisit it. Philosophy, I have a collection of Nietzsche, 3 of his books in 1 volume that I need to get to, but that won't be a reread, that's a first time. Science, I have a number of those. I have my astronomy books. Some call it pseudoscience, so I have my astrology books. Again, the chakras, crystals, ancient civilizations, self-help. I've already talked about, oh, this is in ancient Egypt. This is different. Why can I never remember this name? The Giants is what that first one's about. I have Göbekli Tepe. I have how the constellations of Orion and Pleiades relate back to the various cultures of ancient Egypt and the Mayans. So, yeah, there's a lot of nonfiction that I reread. And I think part of it comes into another question, or I'll talk about that in a bit. Number 5, if you've read a book which has been translated from another language, would you reread the same book in a newer or different translation? Possibly, but it would depend on the book. I have the Iliad and Homer. I have the Iliad and the Odyssey, which I read years ago. I want to revisit that at some point. So I don't know if I would read another translation. I have the Mabinogion, which I still need to read front to back once. I'll certainly be rereading that more than once because I'm very fascinated by it. And I only have that in a translation by one set of authors. So it depends if I come across something in my timeline for reading. Okay, here's the other one. 6, how many times would you reread the same book? It really depends. If it's tying in with one of the spirals or interests that I have, I've read some books twice. I've read some books 3 times. I know by the time I'm finished with some of these massive projects this year that will go into next year, some of these books will be at least 4 or 5 times. Now, by the 4th, 5th time, they'll be a bit quicker because I remember a lot of the information, so it'll be a nice, quick, more like a skim than really read word by word type of reading. But yeah, there are some books I'll read over and over because of the content and the information. Number 7, what's the most recent book you've reread? That is, and I've already mentioned this, The Da Vinci Code. This is now my 3rd read of the book. I first read it when it came out, and I read it again a couple years ago, partly because I have a book called The Secrets of the Code that had been sitting on my shelf for years and years waiting. And I decided before I got to reading that, because I have the goal of reading everything I own, I figured I'd better go back and reread the Da Vinci Code because it had been years. I'd seen the movie, but of course the movie and the books are different. So I decided to read the Da Vinci Code again. Then I read The Secret of the Codes, and that's where this massive spiral that is now up to 100 plus of my personal library, thankfully, got started. And so this year, I started with Angels and Demons, which was also a reread a few weeks ago. I just finished the Da Vinci Code a few days ago, and I'll be spiraling out to all the books I read 2 years ago. That's because I'm putting together charts like this. I'll be doing mind webs, connecting the information. I'm pulling together all the different books and how they connect, pulling out all the names of people mentioned and kind of spiraling out from there. That's why this whole Bible study project started, and of course spiraled to the pagan studies. I've read a number of these books at least once, if not twice already. They'll be up to the third or fourth read as I pull everything together. And another book, and this is on my beefcake list as well as my Da Vinci Code spiral, I've just started rereading Fingerprints of the Gods. This is by Graham Hancock. I'm not very far in, but I remember a lot of the information. This is my, I think, only second read of Fingerprints. I kept meaning to reread it. It could be my third read. I'll have to check on Goodreads whether I recorded it a number of years ago, because I know I had all my ancient Egypt and ancient civilization books in 4 cubes, and I managed to read those all in a year on top of the other reading. So this might be my third time through Hancock's work, but that also will tie in and connect with Zechariah Sitchin, the Earth Chronicles. I finally read that for the first time a number of years ago as they'd been sitting on my shelves, oh so patiently waiting. And part of that was because book 1 starts off with the Sumerians and the Anunnaki, something I hadn't really read much about over the years. And of course, it's a whole new pantheon and deities to remember and connect. But I found as I finished book 1, because of all these other readings I've done, the other 5 books very much tied in with other things I had read. And I'll definitely be reading the Earth Chronicles again, start to finish. So yes, I definitely reread a lot of nonfiction, far more than I reread fiction. Prompt number 8 is to tag some friends. I know this has gone around for a bit. I'm slowly catching up with some of the tags. So if you're watching this and this sounds interesting to you, please go ahead and do the tag. Remember to tag Robert so he knows you've done his tag. Also, tag me in the video so I can come and watch your answers. And until next time, remember, be safe, be well, and big hugs.